They're not a checkbox. They're not a checkbox operation, and it becomes part of a commitment that you're going to make, whether you're in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, whether it's building relationships with your local community, whether it's your own learning and understanding your position and who you are in the work that you lead in your classrooms, your schools, or your system. So today I come live to you from Mount Albert, Ontario. Actually, I'm in Holt, but you would never find it on a map. It's east of Newmarket, so southern Ontario. And our local First Nation community, who I have really strong relationships with, is Georgina Island First Nation, Nishnabik Nation, and they are part of the Williams Treaty. I'm a visitor in this territory. My home territory is Batchewana First Nation, part of the Huron-Robinson territory. And so I operate very much as a visitor on these lands. I do not speak on behalf of community, but I certainly will step in front and beside when they ask me to. I just begin by introducing myself in my traditional name gifted to me by my Auntie Miriam, Wawatase Manidu Kwe Indishnakas, Batchewana First Nation in Dinjaba, Hmong and Dodom, Nishnabeg Kwe and Dow. So I didn't grow up in my community, but I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, which is right at the edge of all parts of our community. We're split into 5 parts, but I've been living in this area for the last, 20 years now. I think I'm getting a little old. So there are some resources that you can access that you're probably familiar with, and if you're not, Whose Land is one of them. Land.ca, nativeland.ca is another, and you can see the traditional territory that you reside on and that you're calling in from today. So I encourage you to look that up, become familiar with the territory, the treaties in your area, and that's something you can do through inquiry with the classes that you lead. You know, it's interesting. In my role, I've often been asked to, my camera's on, I've often been asked to come and do the land acknowledgement. And as an Anishinaabe Kwe, like I find that super interesting because I think that one, I might be a visitor to that territory and I might not be comfortable with it. 2, I think it's part of the responsibility of settlers to understand the territory that they've come to, because we have a pretty good understanding about the treaties and the territories for the most part, especially when we reside within them. So I like this quote from Eve Tuck: "Acknowledging land is important to do in settler societies because these societies otherwise only consider land as property. But more important is to acknowledge the relationships to land that Indigenous people as specific people have engaged since time immemorial. To acknowledge land at the start is only a start, but a necessary start to any gathering that hopes to be responsible to Indigenous people, meaningful and ongoing relationships to the land." And so I want us to think about that. I remember we were at an engagement and an elder had welcomed everyone into the space and talked and shared some stories. And then the next speaker came up and gave a land acknowledgement. We need to be able to read the room. Your elder just welcomed you to her territory. You don't need to give a land acknowledgement in that case. So I think we need to understand the relationship and kind of get out of that kind of robotic practice of, acknowledge the land, check. Oh, Canada, check. Like, we want to move forward and move in relationship with. So let's take a minute and in the chat, let us know who you are, where you are, and what you do. And for fun, if you know, share the territory that you are listening in from. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Dean. I love knowing where people come from. Ooh, Sam, we're neighbors. Oh, good to see you, Heather. Awesome, Nicole. Thanks, Melanie and Colin. Oh, Melanie, you and Rashmi must have switched spots. Nice. Oh, amazing, Clara. Lots of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Perfect. Thanks, Sophia. Louis Philippe. I'm super impressed. Wow, we almost have a community of Mississaugas for the credit. Amazing. Perfect. Fellow Wired is Fee, Jen. Nice. Awesome. So, this professional learning session is made available by OECM. It's the part of the Ontario Learning Network. So we're grateful for their ability to fund and support the work that we're sharing in these sessions moving forward. If you have the time, take a look. There are other ones starting a little later too through October, and they're all 3-part sessions. The values within advanced learning partnerships, and Katina's put a link there for you to further explore. Together we perpetuate trust. Together we cherish the value of people. Together we realize opportunity. Together we serve with gratitude. So as you heard, we started to record. This is so that you're able to access this presentation afterwards. And if I could get Katina to even drop the link for there. And what this is going to be used is strictly for educational purposes so that folks can revisit, or those who came in late and might have missed the opening can go back and listen and view it and use this as a resource as you move forward in your learning in your classrooms. So just a little review here. Make sure your mic is muted when you come into the room. If you feel comfortable, once we slide out of here and we do some work together and learning together, love to see you. It's kind of weird talking to a bunch of boxes. I definitely miss these things in person. Use the chat. If there's something I say and you have a question and you're shy, you can private message me. So I'll try to track that as best as I can. And you're welcome to use emojis to share some of your engagement and your thinking. But feel free to use the chat. I'll definitely try my best to look at it, and I have Katina here to help me. So tonight, I think it's a bit ambitious, but this is what we're going to try to do. We're going to talk a bit about who am I, and I don't mean like Pam Agwa only. I want you to all think about who you are. Want to talk about teaching in a good way in the context of Indigenous education, why inquiry, and then if we have some time, I'd like to kind of play with developing some inquiry questions. I've built some I call them inquiry bins when I'm physically in a building, so I guess they're virtual inquiry bins, and kind of play with the images and some potential questions we can create. And then if we have, have time, I think this is super ambitious, identifying some strong inquiry questions to dig deeper into the learning, things that you could try out in your classroom. The one thing I do want to say is when we get into developing inquiry questions, I thought, and so I'm just going to say this up front, I thought it would be good because I know Orange Shirt Day is coming, and sometimes we want to move beyond the tokenistic, everyone wears a shirt, checks the box and moves on. So I did choose residential schools as the topic that we're going to explore through some artifacts, images. So I'm saying this for my Indigenous friends who might be with us this evening. If that is something that you feel you're not comfortable with, then please remain in the main room. Don't take the invite into the breakout room, and I will drop a prompt in the main room. So just want to make sure I'm thinking about everybody, and that's a lesson to all of you as you may have Indigenous students in your class. And when you're talking about Orange Shirt Day, when you're talking about sensitive issues surrounding Indigenous people and the legacies, especially around residential schools, you might want to be conscious to not exclude, but come up with an activity that you can also branch on to for your Indigenous students in the class. So don't forget about that. And we want to thank our sponsor, Intel, as well. Now, I'm going to, at the end, we're going to have a session survey that we'll ask you to complete, and we'll drop that into the chat at the end. So I'm just going to open up this so far. So, I mean, I don't feel like there should be any questions just yet, but if there are, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh, and great. So Intel is also the sponsor for prizes. So Katina's just dropped the link there, and there's no obligation to do the Google form, but if you like prizes, I love prizes, complete the form and you can be entered in the draw. And that can be done at any time through the presentation this evening. So I always like to set norms for learning. Now, if I was doing this in a classroom or we were together in a space and I knew we had a whole day of learning together, I would typically share the article that these came from. So I did link it in the conversation. So if Katina can just drop it in the chat for your reference, but these come from Robin DiAngelo's norms for learning for social justice. One of the things that I have learned over time is that we need to choose norms for learning that push us, not that kind of confirm our bias and confirm or perpetuate things that just haven't been working in our system. So I found these are still kind of my favorite. I kind of blend them sometimes with another set, but I think for the sake of not knowing everyone in the audience, this is a really good place to start. If I was doing this with educators, I would hand out the article, direct them to the end where these are listed, and I would do a Google Sheet and ask them to talk about opportunities for learning that could happen if we adopted these norms, and some of the barriers that could be happening if we adopted these norms. And what I've found every time I've done it is that the barriers are also the opportunities. And so shifting our thinking around pushing is good. Pushing will help us serve our students better. So for tonight and maybe our sessions moving forward, choose one that you feel like you might want to hang on to and focus on in terms of your own learning. Striving for intellectual humility, be willing to grapple with challenging ideas, differentiate between opinion, everyone has one, and informed knowledge, which comes from sustained experience, study, and practice. Hold your opinions lightly and with humility. Let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broader group level patterns. Notice your own defensive reactions and attempt to use these reactions as entry points for gaining deeper self-knowledge rather than a rationale for shutting down. Okay. Recognize how your own social positionality, so your race, your class, gender, sexuality, ability, informs your perspectives and reactions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that one in a minute. Differentiate between safety and comfort, accept discomfort as necessary for social justice growth. And I would even say like racial social justice growth. Identify where your learning edge is and push it. So whenever you think I already know this, ask yourself, how can I take it deeper? How can I take it further? How am I applying this in practice of what I already know? So feel free to use and share these. Most of the resources we'll just continue to share them, and if you see them fit to use in your classrooms or schools for learning, then please feel free. So I want to start in this place of who am I? And you know, one of the things that I consistently refer to, and I did it long before I was seconded to the ministry, is really that monograph from the capacity building series for culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. And I think what happens sometimes is when we're engaged in the learning, there's essentially 6 honeycombs. We jump all over them, but we never spend enough time in the who am I section. And I want to sit here for a minute because I think this is critical to any racial equity work that we do in our systems. And I say that because if we don't have an understanding of who we are, where we came from, who guided our lived experiences, the lived experiences we inherited through legacies. If we don't understand those pieces, I'm not sure how we could move forward and lead racial equity, period. And when I know, like, and you'd be like, well, Pam, that's a lot of work. It is. It's tons of work. And what I do know is I taught one way in the first 15 years of my career, but in the last 6 years of my career, I've really shifted how I lead learning. And I think that really comes from being in a place where I had to lead with my social identity. You know, I'm pretty sure the Indigenous Education Curriculum Coordinator was the only position in curriculum where I was consistently asked if I was Indigenous. So, you know, you're leading work and are you Indigenous? I don't think they asked the geography coordinator question like that, you know, or the literacy coordinator what their social identity is. But I definitely got that question a lot, almost as though to validate that the things that I was speaking to or of were true. And I always thought that was interesting. So it kind of forced me to lead that way. The trouble is when we're leading Indigenous education with our identity, it comes with a lot of healing while we work. And sometimes things come at you so quickly, you don't even know how to navigate them because you're already moving on to the next thing that's rolling at you. And so to my Indigenous brothers and sisters who I know are leading this work, I just say to you, find your people who can tag in, find your people who can stand in front of you, beside you, behind you when you need them. To everyone non-Indigenous in this conversation, this is why we need you to figure out who you are in this system. This system was not constructed to serve Indigenous people. I mean, we're going to be looking at artifacts and images of residential schools. It was used as a tool to strip us of our identities. It was used as a tool to dehumanize us. It was used as a tool to push us into this ideology of Canadian culture that was being built at the time that the colonizers came over and took over. So what we need is support from our racialized brothers and sisters, as well as our non-racialized brothers and sisters, to understand how their identity is situated in this system and how we work alongside our Indigenous staff members, community members, and how we know when to step in front, beside, and behind, and how sometimes that is driven by your Indigenous partner or your Indigenous staff member, and sometimes you have to be able to read the nonverbal signs for you to step in. It's super complex, it's super layered. I think a lot about you know, going to administrator meetings, like OPC would be a good example. I went to a conference there and I only found a handful of other Indigenous administrators. There was like, I think 3 of us in the room that I knew of. That didn't mean that that was it, but that's who I knew of. And I remember thinking, gosh, who's leading Indigenous education in our boards across Ontario? And how are they ensuring that they're staying in their lane of understanding and letting that other lane, like now I just othered us, but the lane of Indigenous education to be able to be cleared so they can continue the work that they do. So I think a lot about that. I definitely had, in my experience as the curriculum coordinator, my superintendent was a white male. And you know what? We learned a lot from each other. I learned a lot about the system from him, and then he learned about who I am and who we are as a people and how to make space, share space, and give space for our voice so that we can put that first person voice on it. I mean, we're in the space anyways, but it allowed me also to be in spaces that I probably wouldn't have been invited to otherwise. And so it's finding that relationship, whether you're, you know, a lead teacher in your school, a classroom teacher, an administrator, a social worker, whatever your role is in your building, thinking about how you work in relationship with. You have to be in relationship or it's never going to work. So I always put this at the forefront because when we're moving through inquiry, you aren't going to be the expert. You are giving up the power in that circumstance. And I love it because I don't have to know everything. And gone are the days of being the knowledge holder and the knowledge keeper and moving to a space where we can co-learn. And I always said, and I get excited about it, that Indigenous education is where it's at in terms of learning together. We were not supposed to be here. We were not supposed to be having this conversation. We were supposed to be eliminated. We were supposed to be, you know, dissolved into the body, absolved into the body, like of Canada and the idea of Canada. But here we are, and let's figure out how to do this together, like in a good way. So when we talk about teaching in a good way, here's your first little chatter question. If you just pop it in the chat. With respect to Indigenous education, what are some guiding practices that you follow to ensure that you're teaching in a good way? So if we could use the chat, what are some things that you do to ensure you're teaching in a good way? And if you're in York, we do have a teaching in a good way document that's on the BWW. And I probably, because I have everyone's email, I can probably send it to everybody in the group for this as a doc. Awesome. Teach appreciation, not appropriation. Well, you have to put one in there too, Roberta. When in doubt, ask an elder. Listen. Hear other people's stories. Have the children and their cultures represented through the pedagogy, curriculum, and classroom environment. Learn and unlearn. Yep. Model, live in respect for Indigenous people and invite elders. Oh, love. Yep. Model and love. Model love and respect. I got ya. Checking in with students every day. Listen to them and believe them. Yep. Our kids are experts on injustices. I'm telling you. And I say our, I mean like in my body, my Anishinaabe children, as Sophia probably can attest to, are really in tune with right and wrong and social justice. So listen to them. They could teach you a lot. My kids teach me every single day. Reflect on who is centered and listened. Yep. Nothing about us without us. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget when I was at a conference and it was all Indigenous folks. And there was one presentation where there was Anishinaabe Kwe, very good friend of mine, and her supervisor, and he was a white male. And he said nothing about us without us. And I was like, I don't understand. I think that's the opposite of what's supposed to happen. So I chatted with him about it after. I'm like, I don't think you're supposed to say that. I think she's supposed to say that. Reassure students that they can show up exactly as they are without trying to meet other expectations about their understanding. Right. And we don't have to do it with words, right? We can do it with our actions. Our actions speak so much louder than the words that we speak. Yeah. No checkbox. Building your own knowledge. Yeah. Sometimes the starting point, and and people sometimes don't agree with me, but sometimes the starting point is to pick up a book. If you don't know what you don't know, you were never meant to know, then that's where you start. And there are so many good podcasts out there right now. And so many of my friends are doing them, and selfish plug for my girlfriend, Kalinda Klein, and what she's rocking in the work with Anti-Racist Educator Reads and who she brings into those conversations, like quality individuals. Connect to the local community. So connect to the local community sometimes can be tough, and I acknowledge that. So sometimes your school board might be in an area that doesn't have a local community within it. And so sometimes we have to expand what we think that means. It doesn't have to be within the boundaries of your board. You are still on that traditional territory, and you want to think about the individuals, because there are so many urban Indigenous youth and families. And so, for example, like my girls, home territory, Sault Ste. Marie, Batchewana First Nation. So we want to think about how are we connecting to not just the community that's the neighbor, but also the urban population within the school. Self-reflection. Yeah, ask an elder. We want to make sure that we do, when we ask an elder, maybe we work through our Indigenous Ed leads. Some are on the call today, so they can maybe even chat about what that looks like in their board, but we don't want to overwork our elders either. We want to make sure we respect their time and space as well. Yeah, keep going back to CRRP. It's a journey. Yes. That's perfect, Louis Philippe. Like history teacher incorporates a lot of Indigenous history. Look at the facts, look at the things that you have access to, and then think about how can you bring in authentic voice. That would be the only layer I would add. Value listening, like really listening. Yeah. We have to be open to accepting of being called out and learning from our students 100%. Go outside. Sometimes, yes, just go outside. Take your shoes and socks off. Like feel the land on your feet. Maintain a connection to keep and learning from First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Education Lead and our board and Indigenous community partners. Yeah, and have an awareness of their workload too. So some of our boards in Ontario specifically, and I know my context is only Ontario, so I apologize to those outside of Ontario, but some people have teams. I remember I had a whole team. I had 3 consultants. I was a coordinator. I had 2 child and youth workers, and then access to a social worker. Some of our boards have 1 lead because of the size of their board. So we want to think about how are we trying to not create more work for them, right? These are great. So you're in a good spot. You're in a good spot of knowing whose voices you have to center, knowing you have to decenter yourselves, and we have to take a learning stance when we talk about Indigenous education. Goodness, already a half hour gone. Let's see how this goes. So, you know, you've all talked about these things. These are some awareness pieces. Recognize that teaching and learning is a journey. And the best thing about education is we're in it for 30 years. So why not switch it up? Like who wants to do the same thing every single year anyways? Change it up. Your learning is ongoing. It becomes a much more fun career. You want to reflect on yourself, your culture, power imbalances, attitudes, and beliefs. This is key in leading anything connected to racial equity, but especially Indigenous education. Encourage time to get to know Indigenous community and learn about the realities of historical, political, cultural, and social realities. I am always blown away. We did several learning sessions alongside Georgina Island First Nation. We did some with Nancy Rowe within the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we did some at the Mohawk Residential School in Brantford. And I was always shocked at the number of educators who still didn't know. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware that not everybody still knows, which is just astounding to me, but it's a reality. So we also want to set high attainable expectations, both for ourselves and for our students. So tonight, what I wanted to do is talk about how inquiry learning could be our tool. And so some of the things that I'm going to reference come straight from this resource, Think 4 to 6. There's a whole series of them. They run at the, and I don't work for them, but I just like the resource. There's a kindergarten one, a 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7, 8, and then a inquiry for all. I like the 4 to 6 books because for me, I kind of like the Black Line Masters in the back. And I know, like, God, that shows my age, but for me, it really helped me practice what inquiry should look like. It gave me great tools in having students do self-reflection around their inquiry questions and the inquiry work that they were doing. And it was really good because, again, learning with them, right? So I definitely was new at it when I first started doing this about, gosh, I'm getting 7 years ago. So these are some things we want to move away from and what we want to move towards. So, you know, we're used to the traditional style of learning, and, you know, you're going to have educators in your building who still teach like this. I have 3 daughters. They still teach like this. Okay. You know, you have to learn this. You need to memorize this. There's only one right answer. I'm going to have all the knowledge. I'm going to give it all to you. And all of you are going to get the same knowledge. And it's super passive, and always assessment is for marks. It's all about your score at the end of the day. Inquiry learning takes a lot of this like holding of everything, and it moves it and shifts it into the hands of our students, and it almost joins us together in the learning. And so, you know, you want to learn how to know. You're going to ask, you're going to inquire, you want to ask it in a way that there's many possible answers. You want to ensure that you're centering the student. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? When we talk about CRRP, we're centering the learner. It's really personalized in how we do it. There's active learning. Learning's happening all of the time, not just when the information's being sent over to the student to remember. and we look at assessment for learning. We've really been playing with, I did a pilot last year, and we were really playing with how do we move away from tests and this routine of here's a quiz, here's a performance task, here's a test. And I really pushed my team members in math because math folks love that routine. We love the answer, and I have a math background, so I totally get it. But I had way more fun conducting experiments and having students learn through experimenting in math and building equations through experiments than I did testing them about them. So I find that learning's richer, it's deeper, and they get more out of it, and they quite frankly remember more of it. So inquiry learning is something that, you know, I'm going to totally advocate for. So sometimes we start with, well, what kind of inquiry are we going to use? Like, where do we start? And luckily for you, there's all sorts of inquiry models that we can use. So there's a modeled in a shared inquiry. So, you know, it's a bit of a teacher guides the students through every single step of the process. And if inquiries learning is new to your students, then this is your starting point. It's good for both of you. For me, that's exactly where I started because I wanted to learn with them. I would sit beside them. I would dig into the questions. I would look into the research, and then I would contribute to the group. I took an active role as a learner, and that's just who I am because I have to do something to understand something. So even as an adult, I recognize that I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I'm going to model that learning for my students. Then you can kind of move into guided inquiry. And so you're going to direct some of the elements of the inquiry, and that's going to allow the students to drive all the other aspects of it. So it's kind of like you're giving them a little more responsibility and freedom of what they're looking at and what they're researching, but you're also going to kind of guide it a little bit. Independent inquiry is where you aspire to be. It's almost like if this could be your school year, right? First term, second term, third term. Independent inquiry, your students are going to choose the question, they're going to design and conduct the inquiry, and then you can give them ongoing feedback, and then maybe you can tag in and you can give them some supportive questions that might prompt them to dig even deeper. And so what we're looking at is a gradual release of responsibility in terms of inquiry. What inquiry isn't is read these 5 pages, answer these 6 questions, and tomorrow you'll have a test on it, right? People can think that if we make them work independently, then that's inquiry. It's not inquiry, right? Inquiry gives them time to research and guide. I used to always have benchmarks to meet, because that held me accountable too, to make sure the students were moving along in that inquiry, because you don't want to give them huge amounts of time and then expect something at the end. You want to create those dialogues like in between, which I know some of you do because I know some people who are on this call. So when we talk about inquiry process, these are some of the gears that are connected to it. So we take the opportunity to interpret and analyze, we gather and organize, we formulate questions, we can evaluate and draw conclusions, we communicate what we're learning. In all of these pieces, they're moving together. So it's not like always a progression within the inquiry process. Sometimes something will lead us back to a cog that we've already gone through. So you want to make sure that it's a super flexible process. And sometimes they may loop within the interpret and analyze and gather and organize, and you'll see that consistent loop with them. So when you think about criteria for an effective inquiry question, so these are some things that I stick to. Like I said, that particular resource has some great checklists that kids can work through. So it's an invitation to think, not recall or summarize. Okay, so you can see the difference there. Inquiry, testing, right? We're pulling it apart. Generates deep thinking and deep feelings. Always open-ended. There's no final definitive answer. They're going to share their knowledge and all of their learning through that process. It results in the creation of additional questions. The best inquiry leads to another inquiry question. And it's always tied to essential understandings and key ideas of a discipline. So if you're going to connect it to your social studies curriculum, you're going to meet some of those overall expectations. Remember, those are guides, right? They're not, you don't need to check every single one off. But with inquiry, I find that you have the ability to actually meet more of the specific expectations than you do when you're just giving information, because the students just do it naturally, especially if you guide them in a good way. Love the power of this image. Use this in inquiry. This was in the Oka, they called it the Oka crisis. I love the media, but defending land, right? And so they're all armed. You can see them in their equipment and their guns, and she's holding an eagle feather, and there's so much power in this. So I'd used this before and had students I didn't tell them it was from Oka, but I asked them what they saw, and then they would comment on what they saw, and then I'd ask them, get them to revisit it and say, what questions or wonderings do you have? And then they would post their questions and wonderings, and then we started digging into this image. Where did it come from? So you have so many tools right at your fingertips to build inquiry. I love the questioning grid. It's also in that resource. I swear I don't work for them. It's just a really good way to grid your questioning with the students. And, how do you move? I love moving from the pink section of questioning into that yellow and green section. So that's a really great way to have students do self-reflection after you've moved them through that guided inquiry process, and have them really look at the questions that they've created and think about, how do I move it from a predictive question to an analytical question? And then it really helps them build that inquiry in a way that will be really deep and good learning. So I want to play with you guys right now, and I want to try to use one of the tools in Zoom. So wish me luck. What I would like to do is, I have a series of images, or I have a series of artifacts, and I'd like to have you put questions on them and see like what you come up with. And then we'll kind of talk about it. And I like that I love that 75 people signed up, but I'm really happy 75 people didn't come, because we actually can spend more time here. This is really where I want to kind of practice and see. And I know we're 17 minutes away, but we will carry this into our next session. So I see.
Pamela, how many breakout rooms? I can set those up for you. Would you like 7 of them?
I don't think we need that many, because we don't have that many folks. So I think, what do we have, 24? So maybe 4, and then we can have 6 in each room.
Okay. And do you want to be randomized with everybody in there?
Yeah, that works.
All right.
And then what I'll do is I'll drop the links for group 1, 2, 3, and if I drop them here, they should be able to still access the chat, right?
If not, we can go visit and we can go into each of the rooms and drop it in.
Okay, let's do that. We'll come into each of the rooms and drop it in.
Okay, folks, so we're going to give you a random room, and here you go. Please click on join room when you see that dialog box.
Perfect.
All right.
So okay. Why don't I go into 4 and 3 and you go into 1 and 2? Does that sound good?
That sounds fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you're here to help me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, this is great that we could work together. Okay, so my only thing is, how do you, it's on a Jamboard, right?
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to just go to share and then copy the link.
Got it. Okay. one more breakout. I'm just going to go to room 2.
Yep, and I'm going to go to 3. There we go. We should see I love it when the screen fills up with everybody.
Teleporting.
Yeah. It just boots them out too, right? In Zoom, I always, because there's some that, yeah, and they'll
It
push
will.
it over.
As soon as they hit the 1 minute, it'll just automatically close them down.
Perfect. There they come.
There we go.
So cool. Everyone just pops in.
Pops back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. It's crazy. We are at 7:57. So I popped into room 1, and then I just kind of kept listening, and you made me think of something. So if you teach in Ontario, every school board in Ontario has a lead for Indigenous education. And I saw some creative lead positions when that first came about, but now they're isolated for the most part, except for a couple super small boards. And so that's an access point that you have. So you have to figure out who that is. When we talk about where does this fit in the curriculum, the social studies curriculum was revised, and it includes in the overall expectations now in aspects of contemporary issues. It's related to Indigenous people, and it's no longer written as an example in the Ontario curriculum. So it's not, to me, that says it's not a choice. That tells me that it is time. When we talk about the TRC calls to action and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, educators are called to action in number 62 and 63. And so you have more than enough ammunition to get this moving in your school building. And honestly, I always just start in my own room. People start nosing around and like, what are you doing in there? And sometimes it's negative, and there's going to be that in everything you do in racial justice. And then sometimes you're going to find your people in that too. And you're going to find your co-planners and folks that you can partner with and work alongside. So, and sometimes it takes one risky comment in a staff meeting to find your people too. So I love those people who do that. I wondered, because I want to kind of honor some of the work that you started on that we will continue next week, but I wondered if each group could just share maybe one of the questions that you posed on your image within your Jamboard. So we can go in reverse order because we don't have to start with 1. So why don't we start with group 4? What is a question that you posed with your image? And actually, you know what? I'll pull it up on the screen so everyone can see your image.
Where did it show what group we were in? Because I don't remember seeing a number.
What room did you go to?
It's
Do you
on
remember
the
the
One I
Jamboard.
was assigned.
You just hit the button.
We were
So
in
when I
the
pull the
forward.
image up, you'll know if you were group 4, this was
Yeah, we
you.
were-
Oh, okay.
All right. Does someone from group 4 want to share?
I will go ahead and just say that we had some great start to conversations. We kind of went beyond the questions and continued, but one of the questions was from the perspective of a student: why are these young boys all praying together? Where are they? Why are they being watched by a woman? And who is she? There's a lot of questions in one, but that's one we'll share.
Awesome. No, these are good. All right. If you were group 3, this was your image. I love Monkman's art, so they're always good for conversation. So if someone from group 3 could kind of share maybe even a bit of what your conversation was.
Hi, so there was a lot of, I'm Kylie Russell. Nice to see you. There was a lot of questioning, like, why who are all of these people? Are they living on a reserve? I wonder who painted it. Why are the kids, like, we know why the kids are running away, but like, we're just making some observations. And like, what, like, for me, it was, why is that man carrying a gun? Like, like he's coming to families that have children and saying, give me your children. I mean, this is abduction. So forcible removal of these children. So why are they so interested in these kids? Why are they taking them away? Why are the mothers crying? You know, like, those are the obvious questions. And then we started thinking about, like, the birds, like, is that Nana bush up there circling over them, or is that another form of, like, symbol of predator? Because these are all predators coming after their prey kind of feeling. So there's a lot of insight that came out of the questions. I don't know if anyone in the group wants to add 1 or 2 other things.
No,
I forget the name. Sorry, I was just gonna say I forgot the name, the other name of the person in our group. But no, she noticed that there's in terms of, like, the clothing. You know, it's modern clothing, but it's old clothing, and so how maybe that sort of represents, like, a melding of memory and trauma and all of this all together into, you know, one picture, because the RCMP and the priests and the nuns wouldn't necessarily have been together, but in memory maybe it all melds. So I hope I'm quoting correctly, but yeah.
awesome. Group 2, this was your image. It's a pretty popular one. I think it's in one of our textbooks too. Anyone like to speak to it?
I guess I can start just to get everyone started. I think we were thinking more in general what we would ask our students to get their questions out. So you can see, what do we notice in the picture on the left or picture on the right? You know, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? And what do you know about what you see? We were just starting to explore the connection to identity, and how the identity changed from picture to picture before we were cut off. We were slow to start, but once we got going, we were awesome. I really like the question, do I understand what the image or the picture is sharing? What story is being told and why? And then what is the cause and effect from one photo to the other, and why is the narrative being changed? So.
Awesome. Well, we're going to stick with these when we come back together next week and continue to play a little bit more with these. Awesome. All right, group 1.
So we actually didn't think. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Roberta. That's fine.
She's passing you the torch there, Shanti.
We didn't actually post our questions. We actually started talking about, you know, why did it take so long? Why is this current? And that kind of led into conversation about, you know, the consistency in the schools and how much of the teaching is happening there. So we actually didn't post the questions, but it was all around why the delay. You know, these numbers speak to itself what has happened in the past. So why are we learning about this in the past 6 years or so? Or, you know, why is this more at the forefront now than it was a decade ago, or when, you know, 20 years ago or something like that? So that was the kind of question that we were looking at.
And I think I've made some notes of things that I can start off with next week to kind of address a little bit of the conversation that you were having in your room. You know, I think this is a good starting point. What we'll do next week is kind of look at our questions, back to it again, and then analyze them. And so what could this look like in the terms of learning that would open up in your classroom or in your schools, in your learning spaces? And so what I love is, I want everyone to remember, we don't have to stay in the lane of one curriculum. Inquiry lends itself so well to cross-curricular approaches, huge connections to literacy. Your literacy curriculum is like pretty wide open in terms of the content that you are leading learning in. There's no specific, there's structures of literacy, but that's an opportunity I see. So, thinking about provocations and what they could look like. And right now in our virtual world within a pandemic, how do we do inquiry learning? So we're kind of playing with it together, and I'm learning and modeling, I hope, alongside you what that could look like. And that might have been the fastest hour that we've been together. So I just want to say thank you. I want to remind you that there is a Google form that you could win a prize if you haven't filled it out. And also there is a survey at the end of each session. If you could just take a minute to complete it so we could use it for feedback and know how to change it up. And if there's something that you're thinking about that you'd like to talk about that I didn't talk about yet, that I could integrate into the things that I do, I'll just pop up. The easiest way to get me is on Twitter. My inbox right now is shameful. It's so bad, mainly because I'm also a rep hockey coach. And so a lot of parents are emailing me right now, and I'm about to make some cuts tomorrow, which isn't going to be nice. So you can, the best spot, even if you just put your question or inquiry at AgWP. My DMs are limited in that if I don't follow you, you can't DM me, but just put in the chat, like, I'm okay if you post and say AgWP, I want to DM you, and then I'll just follow you. I don't even know who I follow anymore, but there's a way for me to then follow you, and then you can DM me with your question. I'm happy to add that, because if you're thinking about it, there's likely someone else in this group who's also thinking about that question. And I'm pretty transparent, and if I'm uncomfortable answering it, then I'll record somebody else answering it. I'll bring that answer to our session. So thanks for joining me tonight. It was good to meet everybody, and I look forward to seeing you. I know, rep coaching. You know why? Because I have control issues, Louis Philippe. I have daughters who play hockey, and my middle daughter played boys hockey up until last year. And I'd rather be on the bench than in the stands with the yelling parents. That's really why I coach rep hockey. And I love watching kids grow, and being in the VP role and ministry role. I've really not had the opportunity to be with kids. So that's been tough for me. So rep coaching is one way for me to get to it. Ooh, cool. We're doing the draw now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to spin the wheel, right? We have a little bit of fun.
Spin
It'll
it.
just take a minute or two. So we'll do 3 spins of the wheel. Thank you for submitting your names. I just did a copy paste right onto the spin the wheel. And these are for $20 gift cards for Uber Eats. So you can have a little snack on or dinner on us. And maybe you bring it back for next week. And this is our first 3-part course. And we decided, because, it has been a tough year on everybody, we're going to do a spin the wheel each time. But for those who attend all 3, we're going to capture your names and put you in for an extra special draw. So just wanted to let you know that ahead of time. And you guys are in first, so you'll be able to be part of that draw. So here we go. First spin. Let's see who we get. Okay, and congratulations to Crystal Brown. She gets our first $20 Uber Eats card, and we'll remove her name. Let's spin it again. And it looks like Roberta, you're our second winner for this evening. And we'll do one more. And congratulations to Melanie Holman. So thank you very much for playing along, and we hope you enjoyed your past hour. fantastic start to our first course, Pam. Like it's just mesmerizing what you're doing. And I just love how you're actually walking your talk, exactly what you're saying. You're modeling for us exactly what we could be doing with our students to help bring them along this type of journey. So thank you to you and for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And thank you to all of you for sharing your time and your expertise and wisdom with us as well. It's just great to have you all here. And we look forward to seeing you next time. I will put in the chat one more time the link to the rest of the sessions that feel free to register. These are at no cost. Pass them on. These are all educators who are doing an amazing job and bringing us some incredible sessions. So thank you for being here. And Pam, last word over to you.
Just thank you. And we don't have goodbye in our language. We have see you later. So Bama P and see you next week. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for the prize too. That's exciting.
Yeah, hey, why not? It's fun, right?
Yes. Katina, I don't know if you remember, we worked together a long, long time ago with the MacBook
do.
pilot project. Yes.
I do. I absolutely do. How are you?
Good.
I
It's nice
was
to see
seeing
you.
the names and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this
Recognize.
is great.
It's nice to see you again. And thank you so much, Pam. It was phenomenal and, you know, lots to think about. So thank you both. Okay.
No problem.
Take care. We'll see you
Bye-bye.
next week.
See
Yeah,
ya.
bye.
All right, I'll end it and I will thank you for your help. That was great that you could put the links in there too. So thank you.
Anytime. So next week at same time, same place, but that was awesome. And just something to think about, because I think this is super hot. If in the sense that if we wanted to try and do, like, I'm even thinking 3 1-hour sessions, not enough. If we wanted to do a deeper course, would you be open to something like that? What we call and maybe the terminology is incorrect, but it's what it's called a master course. And it would be where everybody comes as learners, and it's more